All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're looking at a classic battle of ideas systematic, scientific thinking versus, well, chaotic and subjective claims. We're going to break down a really powerful framework designed to win that battle. It's called the Go approach. So, the way this whole thing is framed is kind of like a classic spy movie. On one side, you have the strategic agent. Think James Bond, or maybe a scientist from DeepMind, someone who's systematic, disciplined, and totally data driven. And on the other side, you've got the chaotic villain, your classic Dr. No figure, whose methods are all subjective, unstructured, and based on gut feelings. And that really sets up our mission for this explainer, right? We're here to understand why this systematic, disciplined way of thinking is presented as the ultimate weapon in the fight against chaos.
The core argument is actually pretty straightforward. When you're in a high-stakes game of solving complex problems, the frameworks that are built on stuff you can measure, repeat, and prove will always have the upper hand. It's really about moving from, I feel like this is true, to I can show you that it's true.
So, what's the main gadget in our scientific agents toolkit? It's a framework called the Go approach, which was developed by Denis Verhaeghe.
Now, this is where it gets really cool. The approach actually pulls together three totally different areas. First up, there's a tactile interface. This is all about hands-on, physical learning, using things like Legos to literally build a model of a problem. Second, you've got cognitive mapping, which is about thinking visually in 3D to see how all the parts of a complex system connect. And third, there's algorithmic logic, which borrows ideas from AI, like tree searches, to figure out the most logical path forward. It's this amazing mix of the physical, the visual, and the computational.
And, the whole philosophy behind this is summed up perfectly by this old Dutch proverb, who sows the wind will reap the storm. The idea is simple. Your actions have predictable consequences. Sowing chaos isn't just a messy strategy. It's a losing one that will inevitably be beaten by a methodical, predictable response. So you might be asking, where does this approach get its scientific muscle? Well, the sources draw a direct line to the incredible AI research done at Google DeepMind. This isn't just some loose philosophy. It's a framework that's really grounded in hard science.
The big thing to get here is that this isn't just an abstract concept. It's literally built on the core principles of AI. It uses reinforcement learning, which is basically a fancy way of saying learning systematically from trial and error. It also pulls from the Go Explore methodology, which is a disciplined way to find and lock in knowledge. These are the exact same principles that allowed DeepMind's AI to master the insanely complex game of Go by blending pure logic with strategic foresight.
But of course, this brings up a huge question. I mean, it's one thing to master a board game that has a clear set of rules, but can that kind of machine-like logic really work in the messy, chaotic world of human emotions and relationships? The framework says it can, not by treating people like robots, but by finding the hidden systems in our behavior. And the framework's answer to that question is a definite yes. It gets there by applying well-established, pattern-based models from psychology to decode what, on the surface, might just look like random emotional chaos. Let's look at an example. The sources bring up relationship models from Jungian psychology, specifically the dynamic between an ESFP and an ISTJ personality type. Think of it like this. The ESFP is all about spontaneity, living in the moment. That's their extroverted sensing. The ISTJ, on the other hand, is all about structure, details, and learning from the past. That's their introverted sensing. The framework argues that these two aren't in conflict. Instead, they form a stable, predictable system where the ESFP's spontaneous energy is balanced out perfectly by the ISTJ's structured planning. The framework even goes deeper to explain the why behind these patterns by using something called self-determination theory. It says that we're all driven by these core human needs. Autonomy, which is our drive to control our own lives, competence, our need to be good at what we do, and relatedness, our fundamental desire for connection. These are the engines that motivate everyone, from the spontaneous ESFP to the strategic James Bond. Now, to prove its value, the Go approach needs a target, a subjective, chaotic concept that it can analyze and take apart. The sources pick a really good one, limerence. It's described here as this intense state of emotional hyperactivation that doesn't have any clear, measurable stages, which makes it really hard to study scientifically. And this is where the scientific toolkit really comes into play. You have this messy concept of limerence on one side, and on the other, you have the core scientific principle of operationalization. This is a huge deal in science. It basically demands that you take an abstract idea and turn it into something you can actually measure, repeat, and test. Bottom line, if you can't measure it, you can't really call it science. So, to reach this level of pure, objective analysis, the sources use a pretty provocative term: functional psychopathy. Now, hold on, this isn't about being a villain. It refers to a very specific mindset: the ability to detach emotionally and take calculated risks, all in the service of analyzing hard truths and data objectively. It's almost like how an AI would process information without all the emotional baggage. So all of this brings us to the final showdown, where all these different tools, from AI theory and psychology to even neuroscience, are brought together to make the final case for order over chaos.
The argument even gets down to the neuroscience level. It points to a part of our brain called the orbitofrontal cortex, which is heavily involved in decision-making. The idea here is that this is the actual neural hardware that helps us tell the difference between a stable, functional relationship, like that ESFP-ISTJ model, and the chaotic, emotional state we were just talking about, limerence. And this brings us right back to the moral of the story, perfectly captured in these Dutch proverbs: "Who sows the wind will reap the storm. Who throws the ball can expect it back. Who throws mud loses ground." The message couldn't be clearer. Chaos is not a sustainable strategy. It leads to predictable, negative outcomes. So the crucial takeaway is this: the failure of that chaotic, Dr. No approach isn't just a matter of opinion. It's presented as a logical, almost scientific consequence of using a flawed methodology. By bringing together all these different scientific fields, the systematic Go approach is positioned as the far superior way to tackle complexity. And that leaves us with one final, really interesting thought to chew on. If a systematic approach like this can master a game as complex as Go and even start to decode the hidden patterns in our relationships, what other big, chaotic assumptions that we all hold could it challenge next?